You need to leave this cabin now. People like you don't belong up here. Natalie snapped coldly, arms crossed, staring down at the well-dressed black woman and her 6-year-old daughter in seat 2A. Her voice was sharp, clipped, loud enough for the other first-class passengers to hear. Take your child and move to the back. Economy is more your level. That sentence would go on to change everything. But what Natalie didn't know, what no one in that cabin knew yet, was that in just 30 minutes, the woman she was publicly humiliating would turn this plane, and this airline, upside down. Because that woman wasn't just a passenger, she was the CEO, the part owner, the woman who helped build the airline Natalie worked for. And by the time the jet doors closed, it wouldn't be the passengers who were moved out of first class. It would be Natalie and her crew. But before we go any further, I want to know something. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I love hearing where my viewers are tuning in from. And if you believe in justice, fairness, and standing your ground, especially when no one else will. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful stories like this, and turn on that little notification bell so you never miss a moment like this one. Now, buckle up, because this flight from New York to Zurich didn't even take off before it spiraled into chaos. And it all started at gate B-17, just before midnight. On June 22nd, Rachel Wright was tired, but smiling. At 44, she was the youngest CEO in Pinnacle Airlines' history, and one of the only black women to ever hold the title in a major U.S. carrier, born and raised in New York. She was finally taking her daughter Mia on the Swiss vacation they'd been planning for months. Her schedule was packed with board meetings and policy reviews. But this week was just about them. She held Mia's hand gently as they walked into the cabin, dressed in matching cream-colored travel outfits, sleek and elegant. Their seats were clearly marked, 2A and 2B, first class, reserved and paid in full. "Isn't this nice, Mommy?" Mia asked, eyes wide as she looked at the plush seats. Rachel laughed softly. "Yes, baby, we're finally going." But before she could even store their luggage, a voice cut through the quiet like a whip. "Excuse me," said Natalie, a uniformed flight attendant with tightly pulled back blonde hair and a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "I'm going to have to ask you to move to economy. We've had complaints." Rachel blinked. "I'm sorry. What?" Natalie gestured vaguely toward the back of the plane. "We'll find you space in coach. There's been a mix-up with the seating assignments." And that's when Edward Langston stood up from seat 1C, adjusting his Rolex with a dramatic sigh. "I offered $1,000 to bump him back there," he muttered to his wife, Margaret, who was already dabbing her neck with perfume. "Honestly, I just don't want to sit near them for 8 hours." Margaret didn't whisper. "This cabin is supposed to be exclusive," she said. "It's not just about money. It's about class." Rachel's heart thudded in her chest. She remained calm, but inside, something started to simmer. "We have confirmed tickets for seats 2A and 2B, she said firmly, handing over the boarding passes. "We booked weeks ago." Natalie looked at the passes, then handed them back without looking Rachel in the eye. "Yes. Well, things change," she said. Stepping aside, "I suggest you relocate quietly." Just then, Ryan Cole, another flight attendant, younger, tall, and cocky, came down the aisle holding a tray. He pretended to trip near Mia, splashing orange juice all over her little dress. "Oops," he said with a grin. "Guess economy's cleaner anyway." Mia gasped, looking down at her soaked front. "Mommy, my dress!" she cried, tears starting to form. Rachel grabbed tissues and knelt to wipe her daughter's clothes. "It's okay, baby. We'll fix it." But then Edward scoffed. "This is what happens when you let just anyone into first class. he said, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. Cheapens the whole experience. From the third row, a young trainee named Sophia Evans stood frozen, watching, her training manual clutched in her lap. She turned to her fellow passengers. "This is wrong," she whispered, and someone else finally spoke up. "Their tickets are valid," said Lauren Mitchell, a tech executive from Minnesota. "I saw them check in with me at the gate." James Carter, a marketing director beside her, nodded. "I don't like where this is going." Natalie suddenly raised her voice. "I'm giving you one last chance to move before I call security." Rachel stood up now, her calm cracking just slightly. "Don't you dare threaten me in front of my child." Ryan stepped forward, blocking her with his arm. "Don't push it, ma'am," he said. "This can get a whole lot worse." Rachel pulled out her ID, clear, official, showing her name and title. "I am Rachel Wright, CEO of this airline," she said. "These are our seats." Natalie barely glanced at it. "Anyone can print that," she scoffed. "Let's not play games." Mia looked up, confused and frightened. "Mommy, why are they being mean?" Rachel pulled her close. "Because they don't know who we are yet. But they will. Sweetie, we're going to fix this." Lauren stood now. "Stop this nonsense," she snapped. "This is racism, pure and simple," James added. "You're treating them like criminals for existing in the front row." But Natalie ignored them. She tapped her tablet and said loudly, "Seat reassignment confirmed. Booking error." Sophia, still in shock, overheard Natalie in the galley, whispering to Ryan, "She's not on any elite list. She's probably some diversity hire." Ryan chuckled. "We'll be heroes in first class tonight." Sophia's jaw tightened, her eyes locked with Rachel's. She knew. Back in 2A. Mia sniffled in her mother's lap, juice stains sticky on her dress. Rachel smoothed her hair, whispering softly, "They're trying to break us, baby, but they don't know who they're up against." Edward leaned over, sneering. "You should be grateful we're even letting you fly," Margaret added. "You're embarrassing yourself. And your child." Rachel stood again, slowly, with the kind of strength that fills a room. "You'll regret this, Natalie," she said clearly. "All of you will." Sophia finally found her voice. "Their tickets are valid," she repeated. Louder now. Natalie snapped back. "Economy's your place. Don't push your luck." Lauren stood too. "You're not going to get away with this," James added. "This whole plane sees what you're doing." Then Natalie pulled the last card. "You've been reassigned," she said, flashing the screen. "Policy update." Sophia glanced again and noticed the seat assignment had been altered manually. She knew that kind of override. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. And she wasn't the only one noticing. A quiet murmur began spreading through the cabin. Someone muttered, "This isn't right," another whispered. "Did you see what they did to the little girl?" The tension was heavy now, like a storm building just before the downpour. Rachel looked at Natalie one last time and said clearly, "You're tarnishing the name of this airline." And as Mia clutched her, eyes wide with confusion and fear, Sophia knew the moment had arrived. She couldn't stay silent. Not one more second. Natalie didn't hesitate. She turned toward the entire cabin and, with a tone loud enough to ring through first class, declared, "We're experiencing a disruption caused by 2 passengers in seats they shouldn't be in." Heads turned instantly. Rachel froze. Mia clung to her mother's side, confused. "What's she saying?" "Mommy," she whispered, her little voice trembling. Rachel stayed composed, her arms wrapped protectively around her daughter, but the sting of the humiliation burned hotter than ever. "They're disturbing the cabin experience," Natalie added, as if she were reciting a security protocol. Several first-class passengers turned to stare, and a couple even shook their heads. "Unbelievable," muttered Edward Langston from row 1C. "This is what happens when you let the riffraff in." Margaret, clearly enjoying the scene, crossed her legs and added, "You bring that behavior in here. You should expect to be called out," as if things couldn't get more degrading. Ryan, who had earlier spilled juice on Mia, now stood guard near the lavatories and shook his head at Rachel. "Restrooms unavailable for now," he said with mock politeness. "Please remain in your seat." Mia's face crumpled. "But Mommy, I need to go," she cried softly. Squirming uncomfortably, Rachel leaned forward. "She's 6. She needs a restroom," she said, her voice even. Ryan shrugged. "Rules are rules." From the rear of first class, Sophia Evans stood again, visibly shaken. "This isn't just wrong," she said under her breath. "This is something else entirely." And it was. Because this wasn't the first time Rachel had faced this kind of treatment. At 30, years before becoming CEO, she was denied a first-class upgrade on another airline, one she'd been a loyal customer of, because the agent claimed they couldn't verify her credentials. That sting never left her. It burned its way into her memory and became fuel. Fuel for change. Fuel for action. And now here she was, running one of the fastest-growing airlines in the country. And still, it was happening again. Not because she didn't have status, not because she wasn't qualified, but because of who she was, what she looked like. And that wasn't just personal. It was systemic. Sophia leaned toward Rachel now and whispered, "I'm going to speak to the captain." Rachel nodded silently, her hand never leaving Mia's shoulder. "We're staying right here," she replied firmly. "They can try all they want, but we're not moving." Mia looked up at her mother, eyes wide. "Are we in trouble, Mommy?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Rachel bent low and smiled gently. "No, baby," she whispered. "They are." Behind them, Lauren Mitchell raised her voice. "This isn't a misunderstanding. This is targeted harassment." James Carter agreed. "I've flown Pinnacle for 10 years. I've never seen anything like this." A quiet buzz began to hum across the cabin. Passengers began looking at each other. People were uncomfortable. Eyes darted between the flight attendants, the Langstons, and the mother and daughter quietly enduring the storm. "Pinnacle's better than this," James added. "At least I thought it was." Rachel stood now, calm but clearly fed up. "You're done, Natalie," she said, her voice low and steady. Natalie turned, lips pursed, eyes flashing with anger. "Excuse me?" she barked. Mia cried out again. "I don't like them. Mommy, they're mean," she wailed, tears falling freely now. "Sweetie, it's okay," Rachel whispered, trying to comfort her while keeping her own fury contained. Sophia, standing now beside them, turned toward the other passengers. "Their seats are legitimate," she announced. "I saw the manifest. There's no error." Natalie shot Sophia a look. "You're a trainee. Know your place." But it was too late. The crowd was listening. Lauren stepped into the aisle. "Apologize to them. Right now." James stood beside her. "This is shameful," he said firmly. "We're not going to let you get away with this." Edward groaned loudly. "Oh, come on. She's dragging this whole cabin down. Is no one going to do something?" Margaret rolled her eyes. "This is exhausting," she huffed. "You'd think they'd have some dignity." And just when the air couldn't get thicker, Sophia turned pale. She had just returned from the galley to retrieve her tablet, and what she had overheard there made her heart stop. "They gave us $1,000 to get rid of them," Ryan was saying to Natalie, chuckling. "Can you believe it? Old man Langston just handed it over like it was nothing," Natalie had replied. "Keep your mouth down. If anyone hears you, we're sunk." Sophia felt her throat go dry. Back in the cabin, she looked straight at Rachel, They took a bribe, she said under her breath. From them, $1,000. Rachel's expression didn't change, but the fire in her eyes sharpened. Then they've just exposed themselves, she said. Let's see them try to lie their way out of this. Sophia looked at the others and said louder. They accepted money. This isn't about policy. This is personal. That changed everything. Lauren stepped forward. That's bribery, she said. You could go to jail for that, James added. You both need to be reported. Today. Natalie looked stunned, then defensive. This is a misunderstanding, she snapped, her voice trembling. Let's not jump to conclusions. But the truth was unraveling too fast. And now I want to ask you, the viewer, what would you say in that moment to stop this kind of bias? Would you speak up? Would you stand in the aisle and say enough is enough? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because these moments, these decisions, they reveal who we are. Sophia turned to walk toward the cockpit, ready to speak to Captain Nathan herself, when Ryan stepped in her path. Don't cause trouble, he hissed. You're still in training. But Sophia didn't flinch. So are you, she said coldly. In how to be a decent human being. The energy in the cabin had shifted now. This wasn't just about one mother and her daughter. It was about all of them. What kind of airline they wanted to fly on. What kind of people they were willing to be. Rachel took Mia's hand gently, her voice steady. We're staying, she said again. And this time, no one questioned her. The tension in the cabin was nearly unbearable now. Rachel sat with her daughter curled tightly in her lap, her arms wrapped around the little girl whose travel dress was still damp with orange juice. Mia hadn't said much in the last few minutes, but her eyes said everything. Wide, searching, frightened. Rachel's jaw clenched. Her patience was nearing its end. Up in the galley. Natalie held the crew radio to her lips, unaware that her voice was being picked up clearly by the cockpit channel. We adjusted the seating chart for exclusivity reasons, she muttered into the receiver. She's not a VIP. We had to make room for our regulars. In the cockpit, Captain Nathan Reynolds glanced up from his checklist, his brow furrowed as the words came through. He pressed the button on his console to replay it. Exclusivity reasons? That was not standard policy. That was not any policy. It was discrimination. And worse, it was being done under his command. Meanwhile, in the cabin, things were about to explode. Ryan suddenly stormed down the aisle, took hold of Rachel's arm, and said in a harsh whisper, You need to get off this plane, now! Mia screamed. Don't touch my mommy! Her voice was piercing, raw and terrified. The cabin fell into a hush. All heads turned. A child's scream will do that. Even Edward and Margaret looked startled. Rachel stood, gently unpeeling her daughter's fingers from her blouse. Don't you ever put your hands on me again, she said, her voice low but shaking with fury, from across the aisle. Lauren stood up so fast her seat rattled. That's enough, she shouted. You're out of control. James followed, stepping into the aisle. You don't manhandle a mother and her child. What is wrong with you? Edward jumped up now, offended not by Ryan's behavior, but by the defiance of other passengers. Get these imposters out of our elite space, he barked. They're dragging this flight down with them. Margaret sneered behind him. You're degrading the whole first-class experience. This isn't their place. Sophia stepped forward, trembling but determined. Stop it, all of you. This is unfair. This is discriminatory, and I won't be part of it anymore. Ryan looked like he was ready to argue, but the growing wall of passengers between him and Rachel made it clear he was outnumbered. Natalie tried to regain control. Everyone, please return to your seats. We're handling a security issue. But James cut her off. The only security risk I see here is you, he said coldly. And you, he added, glaring at Ryan. You laid hands on a passenger. Natalie's face flushed red, her control slipping. Sophia turned to Rachel. I already told the captain what's been going on, she whispered. He knows. Rachel exhaled slowly. The moment had come. Mia looked up. Mommy, are we safe? Rachel nodded, brushing the child's curls from her forehead. Yes, baby. I've got this now. Around them. The air shifted. People knew something bigger was happening. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or a rude flight attendant. This was something deeper, something ugly. Being pulled into the light, Lauren crossed her arms. This crew is corrupt, James nodded. And we're not letting it slide, Sophia added. They need to be held accountable. Ryan laughed bitterly. Held accountable by who? Some woman pretending to be important? Rachel turned slowly, her stare leveled at him. You still think I'm pretending? She asked quietly. After everything you've done, you really believe I'll walk off this plane and disappear? Mia tugged her sleeve. I want to stay. Mommy, she said. We are staying, Rachel said gently. No one's taking us anywhere. Sophia turned to Natalie. You've gone too far, she said. I've filed a report and the captain is listening. There's no way to spin this anymore, Natalie muttered under her breath. We've got a real problem. From behind them, Lauren called out again. Just stop. Stop humiliating yourselves. You've already been exposed, James added. We all see it now. You can't undo this. Edward, now red-faced, roared. This whole situation is a disgrace. This woman is a disgrace. Margaret joined in. She's nothing here. Nothing. But as they shouted, as the cabin's tension reached its peak, the cockpit door clicked, and the atmosphere changed instantly. Because up front, Captain Nathan had heard enough. He replayed the recording twice, then stood up from his seat. He looked down the aisle, his jaw tight. Back in the cabin, Ryan tried to resume control. Folks, please sit down, he began, but his voice was shaky now. Passengers weren't listening. They stood behind Rachel, not in front of her. Rachel turned slowly to Natalie and said, clearly enough for all to hear, Your prejudice is now public. Natalie's mouth opened to respond, but she had no words. At that moment, every lie, every insult, every act of quiet cruelty she and Ryan had tried to hide was now hanging in the air like smoke, and the only thing left was the truth. Sophia looked around the cabin, heart racing. He heard everything, she whispered. Every word on the radio. Rachel nodded. Good. Then let's end this. As the cabin simmered in tension, passengers began whispering. A few nodded at Rachel. Some mouthed, thank you. One elderly man even offered Mia a napkin and a gentle smile. The tide was turning, but the reckoning wasn't done. Not yet. Because the captain was about to step out, and once he did, nothing on this plane would ever be the same. Natalie's voice cracked as she barked into the intercom. Security is on standby if this behavior continues. But no one was moving. Not Rachel. Not Mia. Not the growing group of passengers who had had enough. Natalie turned to Ryan and hissed, Get them out of first class. Now. Ryan hesitated, but then nodded and stepped forward again. This time reaching toward Rachel's seatbelt buckle. Ma'am, for safety reasons, I need you to come with me, he said with a forced calm, trying to sound official, but what he said next shattered any illusion of procedure. We need to separate the child from this situation until it's resolved. Mia shrieked and grabbed her mother's waist, her small voice terrified. Mommy, don't let her take me! Rachel's eyes widened. Touch my daughter, and I swear, she began, her voice low and shaking. She's 6 years old. She's not going anywhere without me. Ryan stepped back as if slapped. But Edward stood and sneered. "She's no elite, just a fraud trying to ride with the big dogs," Margaret scoffed, rolling her eyes. "This airline's gone to trash ever since they let people like her in." That was the final straw. Lauren stepped forward, arms crossed. "They're not going anywhere," she said. James joined her, squaring his shoulders. "You touch that child again, and I'll report every one of you to the Department of Transportation." Natalie's voice was shaking now. "This isn't about race," she said. "It's about policy." "Then say the policy," Rachel snapped. "Say it. Right now. Tell me which page of the manual allows bribery, humiliation, and singling out a mother and her daughter for existing in this cabin." Natalie opened her mouth but said nothing. Ryan looked to her for backup, but the crowd was against them now. Sophia stepped into the aisle and turned to face the other passengers. "I've already spoken to the captain," she said clearly. "He knows everything. He's on his way." Natalie's eyes darted toward the front of the plane. "He's not gonna back her," she muttered under her breath. But it was clear. Natalie wasn't just losing control, she was losing credibility. "Mommy, you're strong, right?" Mia whispered into Rachel's side. Rachel leaned down, kissed her forehead, and said, "Always, baby, always." Lauren reached out and gently touched Rachel's shoulder. "We're with you," James added. "We won't let them throw you off this plane." Sophia nodded, her chin lifted. "They're about to find out who they're messing with." Just then, the cockpit door swung open. All eyes turned. The murmurs died. Captain Nathan Reynolds walked into the cabin with steady steps, eyes scanning the room. He didn't say a word right away. He just looked. From the tear-stained face of a little girl clutching her mother's hand, to the tray of untouched orange juice on the floor, to the sea of tense, upright passengers. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, addressing the cabin, "I'd like to clarify something very important." He paused, allowing his words to settle. "The woman seated in 2A, Rachel Wright, is not only a first-class passenger on this flight, she is also the chief executive officer of Pinnacle Airlines, and she owns 20% of this company." Gasps echoed through the cabin like falling dominoes. Margaret's mouth fell open. Edward turned ghost white. Natalie looked like she'd seen a ghost. Ryan took one small step back. Lauren smiled, almost in relief. James let out a breath. Mia looked up at her mother. "You're the boss?" she asked. Rachel looked at her, her expression softening. "That's right, sweetheart," she said gently. "I am." Then she turned toward the crew, her voice suddenly sharp. "And I am ordering you to stand down, effective immediately." Edward sputtered. She's not serious. This is a power trip." Nathan turned to him calmly. "Mr. Langston, I heard the crew radio. I heard everything." Margaret began to protest. "We were just—" But Nathan cut her off. "You offered a bribe. You insulted a child. You targeted a family with no cause. You're not welcome on this flight." Rachel turned to her crew. "Captain Reynolds, please call for a replacement team. I'm grounding these crew members immediately." Nathan nodded. "Already in progress." Rachel turned to Natalie and Ryan, whose faces were frozen in disbelief. "You'll be escorted off this plane before we take off, but I'm not done with you yet." Natalie's voice cracked. "Wait, you can't just fire us," Rachel interrupted. "I'm not firing you, not yet. You'll be removed and suspended, and if you want to keep your jobs, you'll go through retraining, intensive, monitored, and publicly accountable." Sophia stepped forward, stunned. "You'd give them another chance?" Rachel looked at her. "Only if they prove they're capable of change. Everyone deserves a second chance, even them." Lauren smiled. "That's justice." James nodded. That's leadership. But the Langstons weren't finished. Edward snarled. You're just a figurehead, a token. You've ruined Pinnacle, Margaret hissed. You're embarrassing the brand. Rachel turned slowly to face them. The only thing embarrassing about this brand right now is you. Then she looked to Nathan. Have them removed. Now. Nathan nodded. Understood. Mia tugged her mother's sleeve again. Mommy, you're really the boss? Rachel knelt down, took both of Mia's hands in hers, and smiled. That's right, baby. And today, we reminded everyone what that means. Around them, passengers began clapping softly, not the kind of thunderous ovation you see in movies, something quieter, more reverent, like people knew they'd just witnessed something real, something brave. But as Nathan moved to the intercom to finalize the crew change, Ryan suddenly broke. We were told to do it, he said, almost shouting. Management pushes us to prioritize elite clients. We didn't make this up. We were just following the playbook. Natalie whipped her head toward him. Shut up. But it was too late. Rachel straightened slowly. Did you just say you were trained to push out certain passengers? Ryan nodded quickly. Regional management wants the cabin looking a certain way. They call it polished representation. Sophia gasped. That's why we've been seeing these patterns, she whispered. It wasn't random. Rachel's face hardened. We'll deal with that next. Thank you for your honesty. Too late as it may be. And just when things couldn't get more surreal. Edward pulled out his wallet and walked toward Nathan. I'll give you $5,000, he said quietly, if you pretend this didn't happen. The offer hung in the air like smoke. Nathan looked down at the bills, then back at Edward. Eyes narrowed. Sir, he said coldly, you just bought yourself a lifetime ban. Passengers began to stir, shocked, disgusted, outraged. Then someone began clapping, then another, until the whole cabin joined in, not just for Rachel, but for the truth finally being seen, finally being said. Captain Nathan didn't wait. With firm steps and a clear voice, he turned to the cabin and said, Ladies and gentlemen, I've officially logged an incident involving misconduct by 2 members of the flight crew, Natalie Sanders and Ryan Cole, and confirmed that passenger Rachel Wright is not only in the correct seat, but holds the position of Chief Executive Officer at Pinnacle Airlines. She owns 20% of this company, and her authority is not up for debate. Gasps rippled across the cabin again, louder this time, followed by the sound of someone dropping their phone. Rachel stood now, fully composed, eyes focused straight ahead. The air seemed to shift as passengers saw her not just as a mother or victim, but as the woman behind the airline's very name. Edward scoffed, standing once more with a smirk. CEO or not, you've made a mess of this flight, he growled. You've embarrassed this airline, Margaret added, her voice pinched. We'll sue for emotional damage. You think you can humiliate us? Rachel stepped forward. No, she said calmly. You humiliated yourselves. Then she turned to Nathan. Remove them. The Langstons are no longer welcome on this aircraft, or any Pinnacle flight, ever again. Nathan nodded. Security has already been notified. Zurich gate staff will meet us. A couple of passengers clapped quietly. Margaret looked horrified. You're banning us? She snapped. We're platinum executive members. Rachel didn't even blink. Not anymore. She turned to Mia, who was now sitting upright, eyes full of wonder. Mommy, you made them leave? Rachel smiled. I didn't make them leave, sweetheart. Their behavior did. While Nathan radioed the terminal, Rachel addressed the rest of the cabin. Let me be clear, she said. This flight will continue with a new crew, a professional one. She gestured to Sophia, who looked stunned. Sophia Evans will remain on board and be promoted to senior cabin leader effective immediately. Her conduct, her courage, and her integrity today represent everything this airline should stand for. Sophia's eyes welled up. Thank you. Thank you so much, she whispered. Lauren beamed and clapped, followed by James. Soon. Half the cabin was applauding. Natalie and Ryan stood frozen, now surrounded by whispers, stares, and shame. Rachel turned to them slowly. As for you two, what you did was beyond wrong. You accepted a bribe. You humiliated a family. You ignored protocol. You tried to rewrite the manifest to erase us. I could fire you here and now. Natalie opened her mouth, eyes darting around. We were pressured, she stammered. Management encourages us to prioritize certain clients. But Rachel held up a hand. Yes, I'm sure they did. And yet, other crew members didn't spill juice on a child, or lie, or block a restroom for a 6-year-old. You had a choice, and you chose cruelty. Natalie's chin dropped to her chest. Ryan looked defeated. I'm sorry, he mumbled. I really am. Rachel studied him a moment. You might be, or you might just be scared you got caught. She let the silence linger, then added, Still, I believe in second chances. If you're willing to accept full accountability and complete a full retraining program under direct board supervision, your employment will not be terminated, but you will be monitored, and you will rebuild trust from zero. Natalie blinked in disbelief. You'd give us another shot? Rachel nodded once. One. Only one. Don't waste it. The air felt different now. Less like a battlefield. More like something healing. But the truth wasn't done unfolding. Just as the cabin began to settle, Ryan turned toward Rachel and said quietly, There's something else. You should know. The regional director, the one over this route, told us in our last training to keep first class visually polished. That meant pushing out anyone who didn't look like, well, like Edward. Sophia turned, shocked. Wait, that wasn't just your personal bias? Ryan shook his head slowly. No, we were told to make the cabin look a certain way. Said we'd keep high-value clients happy that way. Rachel's expression turned from stern to cold. You're telling me a manager instructed you to target passengers based on appearance? Ryan nodded. Not in writing, but we all knew what it meant. Rachel inhaled deeply. That's not just unethical. That's systemic. She turned to Nathan. Call David Thompson and Sarah Mitchell. We're holding an emergency board session in 48 hours. Every regional manager's conduct and training policy will be under review. Nathan nodded grimly. Understood. I'll report the full crew log, including radio chatter. Margaret snorted. This is ridiculous. You think you can rebuild this entire company over one incident? Rachel turned to her. No, but I can start with this one, and you'll be the example of what we no longer tolerate. The cabin had gone quiet again, but this time, the silence felt powerful, grounded. Then Edward, with one last grasp for dominance, reached into his blazer and pulled out a sleek black wallet. He approached Nathan with an arrogant smirk. Look, I'll make this easy. You walk away from this mess, and I'll wire you $5,000 before we land in Zurich. He spoke low, but not low enough. Rachel. Sophia. And half the first class heard it. Nathan blinked, then looked at Rachel, then at Edward. Sir, he said slowly, you just attempted to bribe the captain of a commercial flight. That is a federal offense, and you just earned yourself a lifetime ban from Pinnacle Airlines. Edward's smirk vanished. You can't be serious. Rachel spoke next. Security will escort you from the Zurich gate, and if you attempt to sue, know that every part of this interaction has been documented by a dozen witnesses. You played yourself. Someone in row 3 chuckled. A soft ripple of laughter followed. And then, applause. Real applause. Lauren led it. James stood. Sophia wiped her eyes. Mia clapped too, not fully understanding the weight of it all, but knowing that somehow her mommy had won. Rachel exhaled and finally sat back down beside her daughter. "Mommy, you fixed it," Mia whispered. Rachel nodded, her voice soft now. "I fixed some of it. Baby, but we've still got work to do." The flight wasn't airborne yet, but the whole energy had lifted, like something heavy had been removed from everyone's chest. And still, in the back of Rachel's mind, a new chapter had already started forming. This wasn't just about a flight gone wrong. It was about rewriting the culture of an entire airline, and maybe more, maybe much more. As the replacement crew boarded, calm, professional, and respectful, Rachel remained seated beside Mia, quietly holding her daughter's hand as the last of the tension drained from the cabin. The new team, led by senior flight attendant Emily Stone, co-pilot Mark Davis, and Captain Rachel Lee, greeted passengers with poise and care, acknowledging the earlier incident with a calm apology and reassurance that the flight would now continue with the dignity it should have had from the start. Natalie and Ryan, now seated at the very rear of the plane under quiet supervision, said nothing. They looked like people who had just been handed a mirror and didn't quite recognize what stared back. Rachel turned to Sophia and said, "You stood up when you didn't have to. That matters more than you know." Sophia blinked back emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. "I just did what felt right." Rachel nodded. "That's how change begins." She stood and addressed the first-class cabin once more. "You've witnessed something today that should never have happened, but it's not enough to call it out. We have to fix it. Starting now." She turned to Natalie and Ryan. "You're being given a second chance, not because you earned it, but because I believe in the power of change. You will undergo retraining. You will report directly to a DEI board, and your records will be fully transparent." Natalie nodded silently, eyes down. Ryan gave a small, grateful shrug. "I'll do better," he said softly. "I promise." Rachel didn't smile, but she gave a short nod. "Good. Then prove it." The announcement came moments later. "Flight 716 to Zurich will resume pre-boarding shortly. Thank you for your patience." The mood had shifted entirely. Lauren leaned over from across the aisle and whispered, "This is the first time I've seen someone actually do something about it." "Not just talk," James added. "You didn't just lead, you led with grace. That's rare." Rachel gave them a thankful nod, but her mind was already racing ahead. She turned to Sophia. "I need every detail you have about that regional manager, emails, meeting notes, whatever you've got." Sophia looked down, hesitated, then confessed. "There's something you don't know. The manager? He's been quietly encouraging bias on this route for months. Says we need to protect the experience for high-value clients." Rachel narrowed her eyes. "By pushing out families like mine?" Sophia nodded. "Not just you. Anyone who doesn't fit the image. You know what that means." Rachel sighed deeply. "And corporate allowed this?" Sophia hesitated. "Not directly, but complaints got buried. We were told to use our judgment, which just gave cover to people like Natalie and Ryan." Rachel stood and faced the aisle again. "Then it stops here. I'm initiating a formal review. Starting with this flight, every region will be audited. Every bias complaint will be reopened. If even one more passenger was made to feel how my daughter felt tonight, then I've failed." Her voice cracked slightly on that last line. "And I won't accept that." The cabin fell quiet again. not with tension this time, but with shared respect. Mia looked up at her mother and whispered, "You fixed it, didn't you?" Rachel turned, eyes softening as she knelt to meet her daughter at eye level. "We started to. Baby, there's still more to do." Then she reached into her travel bag and pulled out a small comfort toy. A tiny stuffed lion Mia always kept nearby. She handed it over and said, "This lion's for brave girls. You were braver than anyone today." Mia beamed and hugged it tightly. "Mommy, when I grow up, I want to be the boss too." Rachel smiled through tired eyes. "You already are, sweetheart." As the aircraft prepared for final departure, Rachel met briefly with Captain Rachel Lee and handed over her executive directive. "Every passenger affected tonight will be fully compensated. I'll cover it out of my bonus if I have to." The captain nodded in agreement. "We'll make it right." Lauren leaned forward once more. "It's rare to see an executive actually show up, let alone fly with us." Rachel chuckled softly. "Well, now you've seen it." She turned to James. "Thank you for standing up. You didn't have to." James shrugged. "That's what decent people do." Sophia smiled at both of them, her voice still quiet. This gives me hope." Rachel exhaled and finally allowed herself to sink back into her seat, her arm wrapped gently around Mia. But just as she did, the intercom crackled once more, this time from the Zurich gate liaison. "CEO Wright, Zurich security confirms that the Langstons have been flagged and will be met on arrival. Additionally, the legal team from Pinnacle's corporate office has confirmed a formal investigation has been launched into discriminatory training practices on routes 4 and 7. Rachel didn't flinch. She just nodded, more to herself than anyone. "Good," she said. "Then we're finally moving in the right direction." The morning sun warmed the Zurich tarmac as Flight 716 touched down, smooth and quiet, like the end of a long breath finally exhaled. Passengers gathered their belongings with calm reverence, as if they all knew they'd been part of something greater than just a flight across the Atlantic. Rachel stepped off the plane holding Mia's hand, the little girl now rested and calm, still clutching her stuffed lion. Their Swiss vacation would continue, as planned, but not unchanged. 2 days later. On June 24th, Rachel walked into the boardroom at Pinnacle Airlines headquarters in Geneva, surrounded by executives, shareholders, and legal counsel. At the head of the table sat David Thompson, Pinnacle's longtime chairman, and Sarah Mitchell, the board's senior policy director. Neither of them spoke at first. They'd already reviewed the flight transcripts, crew reports, passenger statements, and Sophia Evans's signed affidavit. All eyes were now on Rachel. She stood tall, not in anger, but in clarity. "What happened on Flight 716 wasn't just a lapse in customer service," she said. "It was the result of an unchecked culture of bias, masked by loyalty programs and profit margins. That ends today." David nodded solemnly. "We agree," Sarah added. "Your reforms have board support. Fully." The room exhaled in unified relief. Rachel handed over her official reform plan: mandatory quarterly anti-bias training, anonymous crew feedback channels, a new executive audit committee, and a zero-tolerance policy for appearance-based seating manipulation. "This isn't just about protecting passengers," she said. "It's about protecting the soul of the airline." Sophia Evans was formally recognized at the meeting and promoted to a permanent senior staff position. Her name, once buried in the crew roster, was now etched into a new generation of leadership, Natalie and Ryan, who had begun their retraining under full review, were cited by name in the internal memo not for shame, but as a signal of what accountability with compassion looked like. "They were given a chance," Rachel said plainly. "Now let's see what they do with it." Lauren Mitchell and James Carter, who had both submitted official letters praising Rachel's courage, were sent lifetime Pinnacle executive passes with handwritten thank you notes signed by Rachel herself. Small gestures, she told the board, but they matter. Outside the boardroom, the press speculated about what had unfolded at 35,000 feet, but there were no viral videos, no TikTok sound bites. There was only the truth, and the testimony of people who had been there, and somehow, that made it stronger. Mia, now sitting in the lounge outside the boardroom with a coloring book and a fresh dress, looked up at her mom during the break and said, "Mommy, you're my hero." Rachel leaned down, brushing her daughter's curls from her forehead. "You're mine too," she whispered. Back in the boardroom, Rachel addressed the final point on the agenda, an internal whistleblower letter submitted anonymously after the Zurich flight. A former flight attendant, now working in operations, confessed that senior leadership had quietly encouraged aesthetic filtering of first-class cabins to keep high-dollar clients comfortable. Several reports had been dismissed by mid-level managers prioritizing short-term revenue over human dignity. "We now have confirmation," Rachel said, "that this wasn't an isolated case. It was systemic neglect, and it nearly cost this company its integrity." Sarah Mitchell set down her pen. "Then the system changes now," she said simply. Rachel nodded. "Starting with us." She turned to David. "We lead from the top, or we lose everything underneath." In the following days, Rachel personally called several affected passengers to offer apologies and compensation. She didn't delegate the task. She did it herself, not as a PR move, but because it mattered to her. The Langstons' lawsuit threats never materialized. Their Zurich gate confrontation, where Edward shouted something unintelligible before being escorted away, was met with silence from the passengers, followed by a round of applause for Rachel. That moment never made it to social media, but it lived in the minds of everyone who saw it, and it lived in Mia's memory, too. "He was mad because he lost, right, Mommy?" she asked later. Rachel smiled gently. "He was mad because the world didn't work the way he thought it would." Mia nodded. "But you made it better." Rachel paused. "We made it better." 3 months later, Pinnacle Airlines launched its largest ever inclusion initiative, with Rachel leading a televised address on equity in air travel. The program, titled Clear Skies for All, was adopted industry-wide within 6 months. Sophia now spoke regularly on training panels. Natalie and Ryan, having completed their retraining, requested voluntary placements on diverse crew teams and were monitored closely. But given room to grow, change was happening. Real, messy, human change. And as we close this story, I'll ask you, what kind of passenger do you want to be? The silent observer, or the one who stands up when no one else will? Rachel Wright reminded us that real leadership doesn't need cameras. It needs courage, dignity, and action. So if this story moved you, stand with Rachel, share this video, leave a comment below, and let the skies know, fairness still flies.